The rifle shot pierced the evening silence of Willow Creek, a dusty frontier town in Wyoming territory, 1878. Hannah Mills clutched her infant daughter tighter to her chest as the stagecoach rattled to an abrupt halt. The journey west had been long and grueling, but nothing had prepared her for the horror that would unfold over the coming days, or for the man who would risk everything to save them both. "End of the line, madam," the driver announced, his voice devoid of the warmth it had carried for the previous passengers. He'd been coldly polite since discovering she was a widow traveling alone with a baby. Hannah knew what people thought of her situation. A 22-year-old woman with no husband and a 3-month-old child had few respectable options in this world. Hannah descended from the stagecoach with practiced care, balancing little Eliza in one arm while gathering her single valise with the other. The small town before her bore little resemblance to the prosperous mining community described in the letter from her late husband's cousin. Thomas had promised work and shelter after her husband Jacob's death, but as Hannah surveyed the dilapidated buildings lining the muddy Main Street, dread settled in her stomach. "Madam," the stagecoach driver passed down her trunk, the last of her worldly possessions. "The Silver Dollar's the only boarding house in town, 2 blocks down." He pointed with his whip handle before climbing back to his perch, eager to be free of her. Hannah adjusted her worn bonnet and started walking, aware of the stares from men lounging outside the saloon. Eliza fussed against her shoulder, hungry after the long journey. "Now ain't you a pretty little thing?" a voice slurred from the shadows of an alley. Hannah quickened her pace, keeping her eyes forward. Experience had taught her that acknowledging such comments only encouraged them. The Silver Dollar boarding house looked far from reputable. Its weathered clapboard exterior was in desperate need of paint, and several window shutters hung at precarious angles. Still, Hannah had no choice. Night was falling, and she and Eliza needed shelter. The proprietress, a hard-faced woman with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun, looked Hannah up and down with open disdain. "Rooms 50 cents a night, paid in advance." "I'm looking for Thomas Mills," Hannah said, shifting Eliza to her other arm. "He's my husband's cousin." "He was expecting me." The woman's expression shifted from disdain to something worse, pity. "Thomas Mills is dead, girl. Fever took him 3 weeks back." Hannah felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Thomas had been her only hope, her only connection in this wild territory. I see," she managed. "You got money for the room or not?" the woman pressed. Hannah reached into her reticule with trembling fingers and counted out coins. Her entire savings would last perhaps 2 weeks if she was careful. "Is there work in town? For a woman, I mean." The proprietress's gaze flicked to Eliza. "Not with a babe in arms, there ain't, unless you're willing to." She left the implication hanging. "No," Hannah said firmly. "I'll find something respectable," the woman shrugged. "Rooms upstairs, last door on the left. There's a pump out back for washing." Hannah climbed the narrow stairs, fighting tears. She had fled Missouri after Jacob's death when his creditors threatened to take everything. The promise of a new start with Thomas had been her salvation. Now that hope was gone. In the small, spare room, Hannah laid Eliza on the bed and finally allowed herself to weep silently. The baby gurgled and reached for her mother's tear-streaked face. "It's all right, my sweet girl," Hannah whispered, though she knew it was a lie. "Mama will figure something out." For 3 days, Hannah searched for work. She tried the general store, the milliner's shop, even the school, but no one would hire a woman with an infant. Each rejection drove her closer to despair, and her dwindling funds meant she would soon face the streets. On the 4th morning, as Hannah sat on her bed contemplating selling her wedding ring, her last connection to Jacob, a sharp knock came at her door. "Miss Mills." It was the proprietress. "There's someone here to see you." Hope flared briefly. Perhaps someone had heard of her plight and had work after all. But when she opened the door, she found herself facing a corpulent man in an expensive suit, a gold watch chain stretched across his considerable girth. "Mrs. Mills?" he asked, hat in hand with a politeness that didn't reach his small, calculating eyes. "Bartholomew Jenkins, at your service. I represent certain business interests in town. How can I help you, Mr. Jenkins?" Hannah asked warily. "It's come to my attention that you're in need of funds," he said, glancing around the sparse room. "I might have a proposition for you." Hannah clutched Eliza closer. "What sort of proposition?" Jenkins smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Willow Creek is hosting an event tomorrow evening. A private auction, you might say, for gentlemen of means. We find suitable. Employees for establishments throughout the territory." The blood drained from Hannah's face as understanding dawned. "You're suggesting I sell myself." "Business arrangement, Mrs. Mills," Jenkins corrected smoothly. "You'd be well compensated. Your child would want for nothing." "Get out," Hannah whispered, then louder. "Get out." Jenkins replaced his hat with deliberate slowness. "Think carefully, Mrs. Mills. Your options are limited, and I understand you have only 3 days' board left. The auction begins at 8 tomorrow evening. Back room of the Gilded Lily Saloon." After he left, Hannah sank to the floor, Eliza wailing in her arms. She had heard of such auctions women sold to brothels or as companions to lonely miners. The thought made her physically ill. That night, as Eliza slept, Hannah counted her money again. $2.37, not enough to leave town, not enough to survive. She touched the gold band on her finger. Jacob had promised to protect them always. How quickly fate had made a mockery of that vow. By morning, Hannah had reached a desperate decision. She would sell her ring and book passage east on the next stagecoach. They would return to Missouri in disgrace, but perhaps her parents would relent and take them in, despite having disowned her for marrying Jacob against their wishes. She wrapped Eliza warmly and headed to the general store, where the proprietor offered her a pitiful sum for the ring, far less than its worth, but enough for stagecoach tickets. As she exited the store, a rough hand grabbed her arm. "There she is," growled Jenkins, flanked by 2 burly men. "Thought you'd skip town after I went to all the trouble of advertising your presence?" "Let go of me," Hannah demanded, trying to pull away. "Can't do that, Mrs. Mills. You see, I've already accepted payment for your appearance tonight." He nodded to his companions. "Take her and the brat to the back room at the Lily. Make sure she's ready by 8. Hannah screamed as they dragged her toward a waiting wagon, but passers-by averted their eyes. In a frontier town like Willow Creek, such scenes weren't uncommon. Women were scarce, and those without protection often met unfortunate fates. "My baby," Hannah cried as one man roughly took Eliza from her arms. "The little one's part of the package," Jenkins said coldly. "Some of our buyers might see value in acquiring both of you." Hannah fought with the strength of desperation, earning herself a backhanded slap that sent her reeling into darkness. She awoke in a small, windowless room that smelled of cheap perfume and whiskey. Eliza lay beside her on a dirty pallet, mercifully asleep. Hannah's head throbbed where Jenkins had struck her, and her wrists were bound with rough rope. "You're awake. Good." A painted woman in a revealing dress entered the room, carrying a basin of water. "They want you cleaned up before the auction. Please," Hannah begged, "help us escape." The woman's heavily made-up face showed a flicker of sympathy before hardening again. "Can't help you, honey. Jenkins would kill me. Best just accept what's coming and hope you get a buyer who isn't too rough." Hours passed in a haze of terror. Hannah was forced into a tattered gown that exposed far more than it covered, her hair arranged to frame her face. She clutched Eliza tightly, whispering prayers and promises she feared she couldn't keep. As evening fell, the sounds of raucous laughter and piano music filtered through the thin walls. The auction was beginning. Other women, some barely more than girls, were led past the door where Hannah was kept. Their eyes held the same fear, or worse, the empty resignation of those who had surrendered to their fate. The painted woman returned with Jenkins. "Time to go, Mrs. Mills," he announced, roughly pulling her to her feet. "Remember to smile. Happy merchandise fetches a higher price." Hannah was led through a narrow hallway, and pushed onto a small stage at the end of a smoke-filled room. Dozens of men, from well-dressed businessmen to rough miners and cowboys, crowded the tables, drinking and leering as women were presented one by one. Jenkins grabbed her arm, displaying her to the crowd like a prized mare. "Gentlemen, now for something special. A genuine lady, educated, refined, and barely touched by her late husband," coarse laughter erupted. "And a package deal, the pretty widow comes with this healthy female infant." Think of the possibilities. Hannah stood frozen in horror as bidding began. Men called out sums, some specifying vile intentions for both her and Eliza. The room spun around her as the bids climbed higher. $50 from Mr. Rutherford for the Silver Star in Deadwood. $65 for the Red Garter in Cheyenne. $75. Suddenly, the saloon doors crashed open. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the evening light, the distinctive shape of a cowboy hat crowning his head. $100. Jenkins crowed, pointing to a fat man in the corner. "Not while I'm alive," came a deep, resolute voice from the doorway. The room fell silent as the stranger stepped forward. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to danger, his spurs jingling softly with each deliberate step. As he came into the lamplight, Hannah could see he was perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. A star-shaped badge glinted on his vest. "This auction is over," he announced, his hand resting casually near the Colt revolver at his hip. Jenkins puffed up like an angry toad. "Now see here, Marshal, this is a private business transaction. Selling women and children is illegal in this territory." The marshal cut him off, his gaze sweeping the now silent room. "I suggest you gentlemen clear out before I start checking for outstanding warrants." The room emptied quickly, leaving only Jenkins, his men, Hannah, and the lawman. "You're making a mistake, Crawford," Jenkins snarled. "I have friends in the territorial government, and I have a jail cell with your name on it," Marshal Crawford replied evenly. "Your choice how this goes." For a tense moment, Hannah thought violence would erupt. Then Jenkins motioned to his men, and they slunk toward the back exit. "This isn't over," he warned. "It is for tonight," the marshal replied before turning his attention to Hannah. His stern expression softened. "Madam, are you all right?" Hannah swayed on her feet, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune. The marshal moved quickly, supporting her with a strong arm while being careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I've got you," he said quietly. "You and your little one are safe now." As he guided her from the saloon, Hannah finally allowed herself to hope that perhaps, against all odds, they might survive this frontier nightmare after all. Marshal Caleb Crawford had seen his share of cruelty during his years enforcing the law in Wyoming territory. But the sight of Hannah Mills and her infant daughter on that auction block had ignited a fury unlike anything he'd experienced before. As he helped her into his wagon, he noticed how she trembled despite the warm evening air. "The doctor's house is just down the street," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "We should have him look at that bruise on your face." Hannah instinctively touched her cheekbone where Jenkins had struck her. "No, please, I just want to get my daughter away from here." Caleb nodded, understanding her need to escape. "I have a small house at the edge of town. My housekeeper, Mrs. Perkins, is there. She can help get you and your little one settled for the night." Hannah hesitated, clutching Eliza closer. "Why are you helping us?" It was a fair question. In frontier towns, few people extended help without expecting something in return. "Because it's the right thing to do," Caleb answered simply. Then, seeing her skepticism, he added, "My sister found herself in a similar situation some years back." No one helped her. The pain in his voice told Hannah all she needed to know. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Caleb clicked to the horses and the wagon lurched forward. "It was a long time ago. What's your daughter's name?" "Eliza," Hannah replied, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "She's 3 months old." "She's beautiful," he said, glancing at the sleeping infant. "Like her mother." Hannah flushed at the unexpected compliment. In the months since Jacob's death, she'd become accustomed to being viewed either with pity or as a potential conquest. Marshal Crawford's respectful demeanor was a welcome change. The marshal's house was modest but well-maintained, with a small garden and a covered porch. Light spilled from the windows, creating a welcoming glow in the gathering darkness. "Mrs. Perkins." Caleb called as he helped Hannah down from the wagon. A plump, gray-haired woman appeared at the door, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of Hannah and the baby. "Land sakes, Caleb Crawford, what have you brought home now?" Despite her words, there was no real censure in her tone. "Mrs. Mills and her daughter need a safe place to stay," Caleb explained. Jenkins and his auction understanding immediately dawned on Mrs. Perkins's face. "Say no more," she bustled forward, ushering Hannah inside. "You poor dear." Come in. I'll fix up the spare room and heat some water for a proper bath." The interior of the house was simple but comfortable, with polished wooden floors and sturdy furniture. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes at this unexpected kindness after days of fear and uncertainty. "Thank you," she managed, her voice catching. Mrs. Perkins took charge with motherly efficiency, preparing a basin of warm water for washing and heating milk for Eliza. Within an hour, Hannah found herself clean, fed, and settled in a small but comfortable bedroom, with Eliza sleeping soundly in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a drawer lined with soft blankets. A gentle knock came at the door. "Mrs. Mills, may I speak with you?" It was Marshal Crawford. Hannah opened the door, suddenly conscious of her borrowed nightgown and wrapper. The marshal kept his gaze respectfully at eye level. "I wanted to assure you that Jenkins won't bother you again tonight," he said. "I've posted one of my deputies outside, just to be certain." "What will happen tomorrow?" Hannah asked, voicing the fear that had lingered despite her current safety. Caleb's expression grew serious. "Jenkins has powerful friends, as he mentioned, but selling women and children is illegal even in these parts. I'm going to telegraph the territorial judge in the morning. And me, what am I to do?" The question that had haunted her since learning of Thomas's death remained unanswered. "For now, you and Eliza stay here where it's safe," he replied. "Mrs. Perkins could use the company, truth be told." After that, he hesitated. "We'll figure something out. I promise you won't face this alone again." The conviction in his voice gave Hannah a measure of comfort she hadn't felt since Jacob's death. "Thank you, Marshal Crawford." "Caleb," he corrected with a small smile. "If you're going to be staying under my roof, you might as well use my given name." "Caleb," she repeated. "I'm Hannah." A moment of understanding passed between them, not romance, not yet, but the foundation of trust that might someday grow into something more. "Good night, Hannah," he said softly. "Sleep well, you're safe now." As he turned to leave, Hannah called after him, "Why did you really help us tonight? The truth." Caleb paused, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the hallway lamp. "When I saw you standing there, holding your baby so fiercely, refusing to break despite everything, I couldn't walk away. Some injustices a man can't witness without acting, or he'll never sleep sound again." With that simple, honest answer, he left her to rest. Hannah slept deeply for the first time in months, awakening only when Eliza needed feeding. The bedroom window faced east, and morning sunlight streamed across the patchwork quilt as she nursed her daughter. "We're going to be all right, my love," she whispered, daring to believe it might be true. A knock at the front door echoed through the house, followed by raised voices. Hannah tensed, listening intently. "You have no authority here, Jenkins." That was Caleb's voice, tight with controlled anger. "I have a legal claim to that woman and her brat," came the oily response. She accepted payment for passage, which constitutes a contract. Any contract for human sale is invalid in this territory. "She's a debtor, Crawford. She owes for her room and board at the Silver Dollar. Since she can't pay, I've purchased her debt." Hannah's blood ran cold. She hadn't paid the boarding house for her final days, having been abducted before she could settle her account. It was a small amount, but enough for Jenkins to fabricate a claim. She dressed quickly and crept to the top of the stairs, Eliza cradled against her shoulder. Below, Jenkins stood flanked by 3 men, including the town's banker. The sight of Horace Wilkins lending credibility to Jenkins's scheme made Hannah's heart sink. "The debt is legitimate, Marshal," Wilkins confirmed with false regret. $7.25, plus interest. "I'll pay it," Caleb said immediately. Jenkins smiled unpleasantly. "I'm afraid the debt has already been transferred to me, and I've decided the only acceptable payment is Mrs. Mills's employment." "This is kidnapping and human trafficking," Caleb growled. "This is business," Jenkins countered. "Now, where is she?" Hannah descended the stairs, chin high despite her fear. "I'm here." All eyes turned to her. Caleb moved protectively to the bottom of the staircase. "Go back upstairs, Hannah. This isn't settled." "It seems fairly settled to me," Jenkins smirked. "Either she comes with me, or you're obstructing justice, Marshal. Your badge won't protect you from charges of interference with legitimate business." Hannah reached the bottom step, her mind racing. She'd seen enough frontier justice to know that, without clear laws protecting women, Jenkins's twisted logic might prevail. "What if I pay the debt?" she asked. "In full right now," Jenkins laughed. "With what? We both know you're penniless." Hannah removed her mother's cameo brooch from her collar, the one possession she'd refused to sell even in her darkest moments. "This is worth $20 at least." "Already sold your wedding ring, have you?" Jenkins observed cruelly. "Doesn't matter. I don't want your trinkets." "I want what was promised at the auction." "Nothing was promised," Caleb interjected. "She was forced." The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the timely arrival of a distinguished-looking older gentleman in a travel-stained suit. He pushed through the men at the door with the confidence of authority. "What's all this commotion, Crawford?" I could hear the argument from the stage office. Relief washed over Caleb's face. "Judge Parker, I didn't expect you until tomorrow." Judge Isaac Parker, the famous, hanging judge of the Western Territories, surveyed the scene with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Explain this situation." Quickly and succinctly, Caleb outlined Hannah's ordeal. The judge listened, his expression darkening as he heard of the auction and the dubious debt claim. When Caleb finished, Judge Parker turned to Jenkins. "You're operating a human trafficking ring in my jurisdiction?" Jenkins paled slightly but maintained his bluster. "A simple employment agency, Your Honor, for willing participants." "And this young woman, was she willing?" The judge's penetrating gaze shifted to Hannah. "No, sir," Hannah said firmly. "They took my baby and me by force." "That's a lie," Jenkins protested. "She agreed to appear at the auction in exchange for forgiveness of her debts." Judge Parker held up a hand, silencing further arguments. "Mr. Jenkins, you are under arrest for kidnapping and attempted human trafficking. Marshal Crawford, take him and his associates into custody." "You can't do this," Jenkins spluttered as Caleb began efficiently disarming him. "I assure you I can and I am," the judge replied coldly. "The law may be evolving in these territories, but certain principles remain constant. The sale of human beings has been illegal since 1865. As Caleb led the protesting men away, Judge Parker turned to Hannah. "Mrs. Mills, is it? You'll need to provide testimony at their trial." Hannah nodded, bouncing Eliza gently as she began to fuss. "Yes, sir. Thank you for your intervention." The judge's stern countenance softened as he looked at the infant. "I have a granddaughter about her age back in Arkansas." A shadow crossed his face. "Too many young women and children fall victim to men like Jenkins. The territories are lawless in many ways, but not in this." After Judge Parker departed to settle at the town's only hotel, Hannah sat at Caleb's kitchen table, overwhelmed by the swift turn of events. Mrs. Perkins busied herself preparing lunch, clucking sympathetically. "It's a blessing the judge arrived early," she commented. "Providence, if you ask me." Hannah agreed, though she suspected Caleb's telegraph might have emphasized the urgency of the situation. The marshal returned an hour later, having secured Jenkins and his accomplices in the town jail. The judge wants to hold a hearing tomorrow, he informed Hannah. Just to take your statement officially before he continues his circuit. Hannah nodded, resolute. I'll tell him everything. Those men deserve punishment. They'll get it, Caleb assured her. Judge Parker doesn't show mercy to those who prey on the vulnerable. That evening, after a simple but hearty dinner, Hannah sat on the porch swing with Eliza while Caleb smoked his pipe nearby. The summer twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold, and for the first time since Jacob's death, Hannah felt a measure of peace. What will you do after the hearing? Caleb asked, breaking the companionable silence. Hannah sighed. I don't know. My plan was to join my husband's cousin, but with him gone. She trailed off, the familiar anxiety returning. You could stay in Willow Creek, Caleb suggested, his tone carefully neutral. Mrs. Wilson at the school mentioned needing an assistant teacher. With your education, you'd be well suited. Hope flickered in Hannah's chest. But Eliza, Mrs. Perkins would be happy to watch her while you work, he said. She's mentioned as much several times today. That's very generous, but I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition, Caleb interrupted gently. This house has been too quiet for too long, having you and Eliza here. It feels right, somehow. The sincerity in his voice made Hannah look up, meeting his gaze directly for perhaps the first time. What she saw there admiration, respect, and something warmer made her breath catch. I hardly know you, she said softly. I know, he acknowledged. And you've been through too much to think about anything beyond survival right now. I'm just asking you to consider staying, getting to know each other properly with time. Hannah looked down at Eliza, sleeping peacefully in her arms. Her daughter deserved stability, safety, and a chance at a good life, all things Caleb Crawford seemed willing to help provide. I'll consider it, she promised. It wasn't a commitment, but it was a beginning. The next morning, Hannah gave her testimony to Judge Parker in the small courthouse. Jenkins and his men were bound over for trial at the territorial capital, facing serious charges that would likely send them to prison for many years. You showed remarkable courage, Mrs. Mills, the judge commented as the hearing concluded. Not many women would stand against such men in open court. I did it for my daughter, Hannah replied, and for the other women who might have suffered the same fate. As Hannah left the courthouse with Caleb, the townsfolk who had previously avoided her gaze now nodded respectfully. Word of her ordeal and her testimony had spread quickly, transforming her from a suspicious outsider to someone worthy of admiration. Mrs. Wilson would like to meet you this afternoon, Caleb mentioned as they walked. About the teaching position. Hannah hesitated. Are you certain this is proper? A single woman staying in your home, accepting your help. Mrs. Perkins serves as chaperone, he pointed out with a small smile. And propriety matters less than safety in these parts. But if you're concerned, the school has living quarters attached for the teacher and assistant. The thought of independence appealed to Hannah, yet she realized with some surprise that the prospect of leaving Caleb's home brought a pang of regret. In just 2 days, his quiet strength and unfailing kindness had become a comfort she wasn't eager to relinquish. Let me speak with Mrs. Wilson first, she decided, one step at a time. Sarah Wilson, the schoolteacher, proved to be a formidable woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and intelligent eyes that assessed Hannah thoroughly. Marshal Crawford speaks highly of your education, she said, after preliminary introductions. Where did you study? Miss Porter's school in Connecticut, Hannah replied. I specialized in literature and mathematics. Mrs. Wilson's eyebrows rose appreciatively. Impressive. We have 32 students from ages 6 to 16. Can you handle such diversity? I tutored younger students during my final year, Hannah said, and I've always loved helping others learn. The interview continued for nearly an hour, with Mrs. Wilson growing increasingly enthusiastic about Hannah's qualifications. By the time they finished, Hannah had secured the position of assistant teacher, starting the following Monday. The living quarters need some attention, Mrs. Wilson admitted as she showed Hannah the small but functional apartment attached to the schoolhouse. No one's lived here since my predecessor left 2 years ago. Hannah surveyed the dusty rooms with their sparse furniture. The space was humble but could be made comfortable with work. It's perfect, she said, imagining where Eliza's cradle would fit and how she might arrange her few possessions. There's something else you should consider, Mrs. Wilson said carefully. Your position here, my position. As a young widow with a child, alone in a frontier town, Mrs. Wilson's expression was kind but realistic. You've already seen how vulnerable that makes you. Even with Jenkins gone, others might view you as available. Hannah stiffened. I'm not interested in remarriage. I understand completely, the older woman assured her. I've remained unmarried by choice my entire life. But you should be aware that life will be easier with some form of male protection, even if it's just the appearance of it. Are you suggesting I find a husband of convenience? Hannah asked, incredulous. Mrs. Wilson shook her head. Not necessarily. But having a respected man like Marshal Crawford take an interest in your welfare changes how others treat you. I've noticed the difference already in town today. Hannah considered this uncomfortable truth. In the world they inhabited, a woman's status was inextricably tied to her relationship with men. It wasn't fair, but it was reality. Marshal Crawford has been very kind, she acknowledged. He's a good man, Mrs. Wilson agreed. One of the few genuinely honorable men I've encountered in 30 years on the frontier, if his interest extends beyond simple duty. She left the implication hanging. Hannah felt a blush rise to her cheeks. It's too soon to think of such things. Of course, Mrs. Wilson nodded. Just something to consider as you make your plans. When Hannah returned to Caleb's house that afternoon, she found him in the garden with Eliza. The sight of the tall, strong lawman carefully cradling her daughter made her heart swell with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. She started fussing, and Mrs. Perkins was kneading bread, Caleb explained, looking slightly embarrassed. I hope you don't mind. Not at all, Hannah replied, taking in the peaceful expression on Eliza's face. She seems to approve of your company. Babies are better judges of character than most adults, he said with a smile. How did your meeting with Mrs. Wilson go? I start Monday, Hannah confirmed. She's also offered us the living quarters at the school. Something like disappointment flickered across Caleb's face before he masked it. That's wonderful. Independence is important. Yes, Hannah agreed, though she found herself oddly reluctant to leave the safety of his home. Though we'd still need to impose on your hospitality until I receive my first wages and can properly furnish the place. Relief replaced the disappointment in his expression. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. Mrs. Perkins would be heartbroken if you left too soon. She's already planning meals for the next week. That night, after Eliza was asleep, Hannah sat at the small desk in her room and wrote in her journal, trying to make sense of the tumultuous events and her conflicted feelings. Jacob has been gone only 6 months, she wrote, and here I find myself noticing another man's smile, the kindness in his eyes, the way he holds our daughter. Is it disloyal to feel this way so soon? Or is it simply the natural response to finding safety after so much fear? She had no answers, only questions and the growing awareness that Caleb Crawford was becoming important to her in ways that extended beyond gratitude. The following weeks established a new rhythm to Hannah's life. Each morning, she and Eliza would breakfast with Caleb and Mrs. Perkins before Hannah left for the schoolhouse. Mrs. Perkins, delighted to have an infant to fuss over, cared for Eliza with grandmotherly devotion while Hannah taught. The work itself was challenging but deeply satisfying. Hannah discovered she had a talent for reaching even the most reluctant students, particularly the older girls who often left school early for marriage or domestic service. She began offering additional lessons in the evenings for young women who wished to continue their education. You're making quite an impression, Caleb commented one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner. Eliza was sleeping inside under Mrs. Perkins's watchful eye. "I've heard nothing but praise for the new assistant teacher." Hannah smiled, pleased. The students are eager to learn. Especially the girls, many of them have never been encouraged to think beyond marriage and children. "Like you were?" Caleb asked perceptively. Hannah nodded. "My parents expected me to make an advantageous match, not pursue education for its own sake. When I chose Jacob, a shopkeeper's son with progressive ideas about women's capabilities, they disowned me." "Their loss," Caleb said simply. "You're remarkable, Hannah." The quiet admiration in his voice warmed her more than the summer evening. Over the past weeks, their conversations had grown increasingly personal, revealing shared values and complementary temperaments. Hannah found herself looking forward to these twilight discussions when they could speak freely as Eliza slept and Mrs. Perkins busied herself inside. "What about you?" she asked. "You've never mentioned your family apart from your sister." A shadow crossed Caleb's face. "Not much to tell. Father was a Texas Ranger, killed by Comanche when I was 12. Mother struggled to keep us fed after that. My sister Mary was 16 when a smooth-talking fellow promised her marriage and respectability in California. She believed him." "What happened?" Hannah asked gently, though she suspected the answer. "He abandoned her in a mining camp, pregnant and alone." Caleb's voice tightened with old anger. "By the time her letter reached us, it was too late. She died in childbirth. The baby, too." Hannah reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. "I'm so sorry, Caleb." He turned his hand to clasp hers, the first time he had initiated such contact. "I became a lawman because of Mary. Swore I'd protect those who couldn't protect themselves." In that moment of shared vulnerability, something shifted between them. The tentative friendship deepened into a stronger connection, bound by mutual understanding of loss and the desire to create something better from the ashes of the past. As August faded into September, Hannah began preparations to move into the school quarters, which had been cleaned and partially furnished with the help of several townswomen. The Ladies' Aid Society, initially skeptical of the young widow, had embraced Hannah after seeing her dedication to their children's education. "Are you certain you want to leave?" Mrs. Perkins asked as she helped Hannah pack her meager possessions. "The marshal's house has never been so lively." "Or so clean," she added with a wink. Hannah folded a dress into her trunk, conflicted. "It's not proper for us to remain indefinitely. People will talk." "People already talk," Mrs. Perkins pointed out pragmatically. "They say the marshal is sweet on you, which surprises no one with eyes in their head." Hannah blushed. "We're friends, nothing more." The housekeeper gave her a knowing look. "If you say so, dear, but a blind man could see how his face lights up when you enter a room, and yours does the same." Before Hannah could formulate a response, a commotion outside drew their attention. Caleb's voice, unusually sharp with alarm, called her name. Hannah rushed downstairs to find Caleb in the front hallway, his expression grim. "What is it? Is Eliza all right?" "She's fine, still napping," he assured her quickly. "But there's trouble. Jenkins escaped during prisoner transfer. He was spotted heading this way." Fear, so recently banished from her life, returned with crushing force. "He's coming for us." "It appears so." He was heard making threats. Caleb's hand rested on his holstered revolver. "I need to get you and Eliza somewhere safe until he's recaptured." "Where?" Hannah asked, fighting panic. "If he's determined enough to escape custody and travel all this way." "My brother's ranch," Caleb decided. "It's 30 miles north, isolated enough to be secure. Connor and his wife will welcome you until this is resolved." Hannah nodded, trusting his judgment. "How soon do we leave?" "Immediately. Pack only what you need for a few days." Caleb's expression softened briefly. "I'm sorry, Hannah. I promised you safety. And now, this isn't your fault," she interrupted firmly. "You've done everything possible to protect us." As Hannah hurried to gather essentials for herself and Eliza, she reflected on how completely her life had become intertwined with Caleb's in just a few short weeks. The thought of leaving Willow Creek even temporarily brought a pang of regret for the community she'd begun to build. But the idea of leaving Caleb was genuinely painful. Within an hour, they were on the road in Caleb's wagon, Eliza securely bundled against the early autumn chill. Mrs. Perkins had remained behind, as Jenkins would have no interest in her, and her presence might help maintain the illusion that Hannah and Eliza were still at the house. How did he escape? Hannah asked as the wagon rattled along the rugged trail leading north. Overpowered a deputy during a meal stop, Caleb explained grimly. Killed him too. Jenkins has nothing to lose now. He was facing at least 20 years for the trafficking charges, and now he's added murder. The severity of the situation wasn't lost on Hannah. A desperate man with nothing to lose was the most dangerous kind. He blames me for his downfall. And me, Caleb added, but you'll be safe at Connor's place. My brother is as good with a rifle as I am with a pistol, and his wife Emma is no slouch either. They've defended their homestead against rustlers and worse. As they traveled further from town, the landscape opened into rolling grasslands dotted with stands of cottonwood trees. Despite the circumstances, Hannah found herself admiring the wild beauty of the territory. It's peaceful out here, she commented as they stopped briefly to rest the horses. Caleb smiled, his expression softening as he gazed across the windswept prairie. That's why I stay, despite everything. There's a freedom in these open spaces you can't find back east. Hannah nodded, understanding. Despite the dangers and hardships, there was something compelling about this untamed land, the opportunity to define oneself beyond the rigid expectations of established society. They reached Connor Crawford's ranch as dusk fell, the two-story log house silhouetted against the darkening sky. Lanterns glowed welcomingly in the windows, and a tall, broad-shouldered man who closely resembled Caleb emerged onto the porch at the sound of the wagon. Unexpected company, brother. He called, his voice carrying easily across the yard. Need your hospitality, Connor, Caleb replied, helping Hannah down from the wagon. And your protection. Connor's keen eyes took in Hannah, Eliza, and the tense set of his brother's shoulders. Trouble, Jenkins escaped. No further explanation was necessary. Connor nodded once, sharply. Emma's got stew on. Come inside and we'll talk. Emma Crawford proved to be a slender, strong woman with an easy smile and practical efficiency. She welcomed Hannah without question, immediately taking charge of settling her and Eliza in the comfortable guest room. Any friend of Caleb's is family here, she said warmly. Especially one he's clearly sweet on, Hannah flushed. It's not like that. Emma laughed, a rich, genuine sound. If you say so, but I've known my brother-in-law for 8 years, and I've never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you. Later, after Eliza was asleep and a hearty meal consumed, the adults gathered around the fireplace to discuss the situation. Jenkins has allies, Caleb explained. Former business partners who benefited from his auction scheme, they might help him. Let them come, Connor said grimly. This house is built like a fortress for a reason. I'm not bringing trouble to your family, Caleb objected. Hannah and Eliza will stay here while I track Jenkins down. Alone, Hannah couldn't keep the alarm from her voice. I've deputized 4 men from town, Caleb assured her. We'll hunt in pairs. Jenkins won't escape a second time. And if he comes here instead, Emma asked practically. That's why I chose your place, Caleb admitted. You and Connor are the best shots I know, besides myself, and the ranch is defensible. The conversation continued, strategies discussed and plans made. Hannah listened, impressed by the calm competence of these frontier people in the face of danger. There was no hysteria, no excessive worry, just practical solutions and mutual support. When it was time to retire, Caleb walked Hannah to her room. In the quiet hallway, away from his family's eyes, he finally allowed his composure to slip slightly. I hate leaving you, he said softly. Then don't, Hannah replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Caleb shook his head regretfully. Jenkins is my responsibility. I need to end this threat permanently so you and Eliza can live without fear. The unspoken message was clear: so you can build your life, with or without me. Hannah realized with sudden clarity that Caleb had never presumed upon her gratitude or vulnerability. He had offered protection, friendship, and support without expectation of return, allowing her the independence to choose her own path. That realization made what she felt for him all the more powerful. "Be careful," she whispered, reaching up to touch his cheek lightly. "We'll be waiting for your safe return." Something intense flared in Caleb's eyes at her touch. For a breathless moment, Hannah thought he might kiss her. Instead, he caught her hand and pressed his lips to her palm, a gesture somehow more intimate than a conventional kiss. "I'll come back to you," he promised. "Both of you." In the pre-dawn darkness, Hannah awoke to the sound of Caleb's horse departing. She moved to the window, watching his figure disappear into the gray mist that shrouded the rolling landscape. A prayer formed on her lips, not the formal entreaties of her childhood faith, but a simple, desperate plea for his safety. The days that followed established a new routine. Connor patrolled the ranch's perimeter regularly, rifle always at hand. Emma taught Hannah the layout of the house, including the hidden cellar where they would retreat if danger approached. Hannah helped with household chores and tended to Eliza, trying to keep busy enough to quiet her constant worry for Caleb. On the third evening, as they sat at dinner, hoofbeats sounded in the yard. Connor was instantly alert, moving to the window with practiced caution. "Single rider," he reported. "Not Caleb." Emma immediately took Eliza from Hannah's arms. "To the cellar, quickly." Hannah followed Emma to the kitchen, where a trapdoor concealed beneath a rug led to a small but well-provisioned underground room. As Emma settled herself and Eliza on a narrow cot, Hannah hesitated at the ladder. "I should see who it is," she said. "If it's Jenkins looking for me, perhaps I can draw him away from the house, away from Eliza." "Don't be foolish," Emma objected. "Connor can handle one rider." But Hannah had already closed the trapdoor, driven by maternal instinct to protect her child at any cost, even if it meant confronting her persecutor. She crept back to the main room, where Connor stood by the door, revolver ready. A woman's voice called from outside, unfamiliar, tense with urgency. "Hello, I'm looking for Marshal Crawford's brother. Please, it's an emergency." Connor exchanged a glance with Hannah before calling back. "Identify yourself." "Sarah Wilson from Willow Creek. I teach with Mrs. Mills. Please, the marshal is injured." Hannah's heart nearly stopped. She pushed past Connor and yanked open the door to find the schoolteacher on horseback, her normally immaculate appearance disheveled from hard riding. "Mrs. Wilson, what's happened to Caleb?" Relief flashed across the older woman's face at the sight of Hannah. "Thank God you're safe." Jenkins and his men ambushed the marshal and his deputies yesterday at Broken Ridge. 2 deputies were killed. The marshal was shot but managed to escape. He's hiding in the old mining camp 3 miles south of here, too weak to travel further. Connor was already moving, grabbing his coat and firearms. "I'll find him." "I'm coming too," Hannah insisted. "Absolutely not," Connor objected. "If this is a trap, it's not," Mrs. Wilson interrupted fiercely. "I saw the marshal myself. He sent me with this so you'd know I'm telling the truth." She handed over a silver pocket watch that Hannah recognized immediately as Caleb's prized possession, a gift from his father. Connor examined it grimly. "That's Caleb's all right. He wouldn't part with it willingly." He turned to Hannah. "Stay here with Emma and your daughter, Mrs. Wilson, and I will bring Caleb back." Hannah wanted to argue but knew he was right. Eliza needed her mother safe. "Hurry," she urged, "and be careful." The waiting was excruciating. Hannah paced the main room, alternating between checking on Eliza in the cellar and watching the darkness beyond the windows. Emma eventually emerged with the baby, declaring that hiding was pointless if Jenkins wasn't immediately present. "Besides," she added practically, "we should prepare for Caleb's arrival. He'll need medical attention." They heated water, prepared bandages, and gathered the ranch's limited medical supplies. Hannah tried not to imagine the severity of Caleb's wounds, focusing instead on the practical tasks of preparation. It was nearly midnight when hoofbeats again approached the house. This time, there were several riders. Emma immediately positioned herself by the window with a rifle while Hannah peered anxiously into the darkness. "It's Connor," Emma confirmed with relief. "And he's got Caleb." Hannah rushed outside to find Connor and Mrs. Wilson supporting a barely conscious Caleb between them. His shirt was dark with blood, his face pale beneath several days' growth of beard. "Hannah," he murmured as they helped him into the house. "You're safe. Don't talk," she admonished gently. "Save your strength." They laid him on the kitchen table, the sturdiest surface available. As Emma cut away his bloodied shirt, Hannah got her first look at the wound, an ugly bullet hole in his left shoulder, inflamed and seeping. "The bullet passed through," Connor reported, "but it's infected." Hannah had nursed Jacob through his final illness and was no stranger to sicks. With steady hands, she cleaned the wound while Emma prepared a poultice of herbs. "Jenkins?" she asked Mrs. Wilson quietly as they worked. "Still out there," the teacher replied grimly. "With at least 3 men, they've been terrorizing the town looking for you." When they couldn't find you at the school or the marshal's house, Jenkins guessed you'd been sent to safety. He's been searching the surrounding ranches. "How did you find us, Mrs. Perkins?" Mrs. Wilson explained. Before Jenkins got to her, she managed to tell me where you'd gone." Hannah's hands stilled. "Mrs. Perkins is dead," Mrs. Wilson nodded sadly. "Jenkins was ruthless. Half the town witnessed it, but no one dared intervene without the marshal." Fresh grief and guilt washed over Hannah. The kind housekeeper had died protecting her whereabouts. "It's not your fault," Caleb said weakly, his eyes fluttering open. "Jenkins is the only one to blame." "Don't talk," Hannah repeated, blinking back tears. "We need to get this infection under control." Through the night, they tended to Caleb, bathing his wound and fighting the fever that threatened to consume him. Hannah refused to leave his side, even when Emma offered to relieve her. "I can't lose him," she whispered to Eliza, who slept in a makeshift cradle nearby. "Not when I've only just found him." As dawn approached, Caleb's fever finally broke. Hannah, exhausted but relieved, dozed in a chair beside the bed where they'd moved him. She awakened to his fingers gently brushing her cheek. "You stayed," he murmured. "Of course I stayed," she replied, taking his hand in hers. "You've been doing all the protecting since we met. It was my turn." A ghost of his familiar smile touched his lips. "I like being protected by you." Hannah might have said more, the emotions that had been building over weeks finally ready to be voiced, but Connor burst into the room, expression tense. "Riders coming. 5 of them." Hannah's breath caught. "Jenkins?" "Most likely. Mrs." Wilson recognized one of the men as the same who ambushed Caleb. Caleb struggled to sit up. "My gun, you can barely lift your head," Hannah protested. "We'll handle this," Connor assured his brother. "Emma's already in position upstairs with the rifle. Mrs. Wilson knows how to shoot." "And Hannah, I can shoot too," Hannah interrupted. Jacob had insisted she learn, one of his many progressive ideas that had scandalized her parents. "I'm not helpless." Caleb looked at her with something like pride mixed with concern. "Take my revolver. It's lighter than Connor's." As Connor returned to his defensive position, Hannah checked Eliza one last time, sleeping peacefully despite the tension surrounding her, before taking up Caleb's Colt and moving to the window. The 5 riders approached slowly, confidently. Jenkins rode at their center, his round face visible even at a distance. They halted just beyond easy rifle range. "Crawford," Jenkins bellowed. "I know you're harboring the Mills woman and her brat. Send them out and the rest of you might live," Connor called back from his position on the porch. "You're trespassing on private property, Jenkins. Turn around and ride away while you still can." Jenkins laughed, an ugly sound. "There are 5 of us and what, an injured marshal, his farmer brother, and some women." "Be reasonable, Crawford. My last warning," Connor replied steadily. Leave now. Jenkins signaled to his men, who spread out to approach from different angles. Hannah steeled herself, remembering Jacob's lessons about steady breathing and smooth trigger pressure. The first shot came from Emma, upstairs, a clean hit that unseated one of Jenkins's men immediately. The battle erupted in earnest then, bullets splintering wood and shattering windows as Hannah and the others returned fire. Through the chaos, Hannah kept track of Jenkins, watching as he dismounted and attempted to circle around to the back of the house. With a quick word to Connor, she slipped through the kitchen and positioned herself to intercept Jenkins if he tried to enter through the rear door. She didn't have to wait long. The door handle turned slowly, and Hannah raised Caleb's revolver, hands steady despite her pounding heart. When Jenkins burst through, Hannah didn't hesitate. The shot caught him in the chest, driving him backward. He stared at her in shock, his own pistol unfired. You, he gasped, recognition and fury in his dying eyes. Me, Hannah confirmed, keeping the revolver trained on him as he collapsed. Outside, the gunfire was diminishing. Connor's voice called out, Hannah, are you all right? I'm fine, she called back. Jenkins is down. The remaining attackers, seeing their leader fall, quickly surrendered or fled. By mid-morning, the threat was definitively ended, with 3 of Jenkins's men dead and 2 captured for transport to the territorial prison. Hannah returned to Caleb's side, shaken but resolute. He reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong for a man who'd been at death's door hours earlier. You're one hell of a woman, Hannah Mills, he said softly. Language, Marshal, she teased, though tears threatened. The reality of what she'd done taking a human life, even one as despicable as Jenkins, was beginning to sink in. Caleb seemed to understand. You did what was necessary to protect your daughter, to protect all of us. I know, Hannah whispered, but I never thought I'd. It changes you, he acknowledged. Taking a life, but you did it for the right reasons. As the adrenaline of the confrontation faded, exhaustion claimed them both. Hannah curled up in the chair beside Caleb's bed, unwilling to leave his side even for the comfort of a proper bed. The next few days brought healing and reflection. Caleb's condition improved steadily under Hannah's care, while she worked through her complicated feelings about Jenkins's death. Mrs. Wilson returned to Willow Creek to inform the town of events and to arrange a proper burial for Mrs. Perkins. A week after the shootout, Hannah sat on the porch with Eliza, watching the sunset paint the prairie in fiery hues. Caleb joined her, moving slowly but steadily, his arm still in a sling. Beautiful, he commented, easing himself onto the bench beside her. It is, Hannah agreed, though she was looking at him rather than the sunset. Caleb smiled, catching her gaze. Connor says we're welcome to stay as long as we need, but I imagine you're eager to get back to your teaching. Actually, Hannah said, I've been thinking. Dangerous pastime, he teased gently. These past weeks have shown me something important, she continued, suddenly serious. Life is unpredictable and often cruel. Happiness, when we find it, shouldn't be postponed or denied out of fear or convention. Caleb's expression grew intent. What are you saying, Hannah? She took a deep breath. I'm saying that I care for you, Caleb, more than gratitude, more than friendship. I didn't expect to feel this way again so soon after Jacob, but I do, and life is too short to pretend otherwise. Joy bloomed across Caleb's features, transforming him. I've been in love with you since I saw you holding Eliza on that auction block, he admitted. Your courage, your determination, I've never met anyone like you. In love, Hannah repeated, hardly daring to believe. Completely, Caleb confirmed, but I didn't want to pressure you. You needed safety and independence, not another man making demands. Hannah shifted Eliza to one arm so she could take Caleb's hand. You never demanded anything. That's part of why I fell in love with you. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Then, with the same deliberate care he brought to everything, Caleb leaned forward and kissed her a gentle, questioning touch that deepened as Hannah responded with the full measure of her feelings. When they parted, Eliza gurgled happily between them, as if approving this new development. "She has good judgment," Caleb smiled, touching the baby's cheek tenderly. "Like her mother." 2 months later, on a crisp December morning, Hannah stood before the small church in Willow Creek, Eliza in her arms and happiness in her heart. The town had gathered to witness her marriage to Marshal Caleb Crawford, a union that surprised no one who had observed their growing devotion. Mrs. Wilson, standing as Hannah's attendant, adjusted the simple veil. "You look radiant, my dear." Hannah smoothed the skirt of her new blue dress, not white, out of respect for Jacob's memory, but a joyful color nonetheless. "I never expected to find love again," she confessed. "Especially not here, in a place that once held such danger." "The frontier brings out the worst and best in people," Mrs. Wilson observed wisely. "You and Caleb found each other because you both represent the best courage, honor, and the willingness to stand against injustice." The ceremony itself was brief, but meaningful. Caleb, resplendent in his best suit, spoke his vows with the same quiet conviction that characterized everything he did. Hannah, passing Eliza to Emma for the moment, promised to love and honor the man who had risked everything to save her and her daughter. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Caleb's kiss was reverent yet filled with promise, eliciting cheers and a few good-natured whistles from the assembled townsfolk. As they turned to face their community as husband and wife, Hannah felt a sense of completion she had never expected to experience again. The celebration continued at the town hall, where tables groaned with food contributed by every household in Willow Creek. Hannah and Caleb circulated among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Connor, visiting from the ranch with Emma, clapped his brother on the shoulder. "Never thought I'd see you settled, Caleb, but she's worth changing your ways for." "That she is," Caleb agreed, his gaze finding Hannah across the room where she stood with Eliza. "Both of them are." Later, as the winter sun set early over the town, Caleb and Hannah returned to what was now their home together. The marshal's house had been transformed by Hannah's touch over the past month's curtains at the windows, flowers on the table even in December, and a cradle in the corner of their bedroom. "Welcome home, Mrs. Crawford," Caleb said softly as he carried Eliza across the threshold, Hannah following with a smile. "It feels right," Hannah replied, taking in the warm glow of the lamps Mrs. Wilson had thoughtfully lit before their arrival. "The three of us together." They settled Eliza in her cradle before Caleb drew Hannah into his arms. "I was thinking," he began, a hint of nervousness in his voice about the future. "My job as marshal is dangerous," Hannah finished for him. "I know, and I wouldn't ask you to give it up." "But I'm considering it anyway," he admitted. "Connor needs help with the ranch. It's growing, and with the railroad coming through next year, there's opportunity to expand. It would be a more stable life for Eliza, for any other children we might have." Hannah's heart quickened at the thought. "Other children, if you want them," Caleb said carefully. "I'd like a large family, brothers and sisters for Eliza." "I'd like that too," Hannah whispered, leaning into his embrace. "Very much." As night settled over Willow Creek, Hannah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terror of the auction block to the safety of Caleb's arms, from isolation to community, from despair to hope, it was a transformation she could never have imagined when she first arrived in this frontier town. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, stroking her hair as they sat before the fire. "That sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures," Hannah replied. "If not for Jenkins and that awful auction, we might never have met." "I'd have found you somehow," Caleb said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be." Hannah smiled, thinking of all they had overcome and all that lay ahead. "Yes," she agreed. "Some things are meant to be." In the cradle nearby, Eliza slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge even in her infant understanding that she was loved and protected. No auction block would ever threaten her future. No danger would go unchallenged by the man who had once declared, "Not while I'm alive." And Hannah, watching her husband's face in the firelight, knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just safety, but the truest happiness, a love born of courage, forged in adversity, and destined to grow stronger with each passing day in this wild, beautiful land they called home. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers transforming the Wyoming prairie. Hannah stood on the porch of their new home at Connor's Ranch, watching Caleb teaching 4-year-old Eliza to ride her pony in the fenced paddock. The little girl's laughter carried on the breeze, a sound that never failed to warm Hannah's heart. "Not too fast," she called, instinctively protective despite knowing Caleb would never let their daughter come to harm. "She's a natural, Hannah," Caleb called back, pride evident in his voice. "Like her mother." Hannah smiled, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly where their second child grew. The past 3 years had brought changes she could never have anticipated on that terrifying day at the auction block. Caleb had resigned as marshal, joining Connor in building one of the most prosperous cattle operations in the territory. Hannah divided her time between caring for Eliza and teaching at the small school they had established for the children of ranch workers. Their family had grown too. Connor and Emma had welcomed twin boys the previous year, and several other families had settled nearby, drawn by the promise of steady work and the safety the Crawford brothers ensured for all under their protection. As Hannah watched her husband and daughter, she marveled at how completely fear had been replaced by contentment. Eliza had no memory of the danger that had once threatened them, knowing only the security of her father's love and the wide open spaces that were her birthright. Caleb glanced up, catching Hannah's gaze across the yard. Even after 3 years of marriage, that look still made her pulse quicken. He lifted Eliza from the pony and set her on his shoulders, heading toward the house. "Mama," Eliza called, waving excitedly. "I rode all by myself." "I saw, sweetheart," Hannah replied, descending the steps to meet them. "You were very brave." "Like you," Caleb said softly, setting Eliza down and pulling Hannah into a gentle embrace. "The bravest woman I've ever known." Later that evening, with Eliza asleep and the ranch quiet under a canopy of stars, Hannah and Caleb sat on their porch swing, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against him. "I received a letter from Mrs. Wilson today," Hannah mentioned. "She's retiring from teaching at the end of the term." "After 30 years, Caleb nodded. "She deserves her rest." "She's asked if I'd consider returning to take her place," Hannah said. "She thinks Eliza would benefit from the town school when she's older and with the new baby coming." Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering. "Do you want to go back?" Hannah thought about it, truly thought about returning to where their story had begun. "No," she said finally. "Willow Creek was where I found you, and I'll always be grateful for that. But this is our home now, the ranch, the family we're building. I'd rather our children grow up here, with space and freedom." Caleb's smile was tender as he placed his hand over hers on her growing belly. "I feel the same, though I'd follow you anywhere you wanted to go." "I know," Hannah said simply. In that certainty lay the difference between her first marriage and her second. Jacob had loved her, but there had always been a fragility to their relationship, a sense that one misstep might shatter it. With Caleb, there was unshakable trust, built on the foundation of what they had faced together. "Did I ever tell you," Caleb said thoughtfully, "that the day I stopped that auction, I had nearly left town on a prisoner transport, if I'd been delayed even an hour?" "But you weren't," Hannah replied, touching his face. "You were exactly where you needed to be, where I needed you to be." The memory of that day, the terror, the humiliation, the desperate clutching of Eliza to her breast had faded with time, though it would never disappear entirely. Now it existed primarily as the beginning of their story, the moment when fate had intervened through Caleb's courage and conviction. "Not while I'm alive," he had promised that day, and he had kept that promise through danger, hardship, and the everyday challenges of building a life together. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them, Hannah gave silent thanks for the man beside her, for the daughter sleeping peacefully inside, and for the child growing beneath her heart. From the darkest moment of her life had come this abundant happiness, proof that even on the untamed frontier, love could flourish and family could thrive. "What shall we name this one?" Caleb asked softly, his hand still cradling her belly. "If it's a boy, Jacob," Hannah replied, "to honor the past. And if it's a girl," Hannah smiled in the darkness, "hope, because that's what you gave us that day, hope for a future I couldn't imagine." Caleb kissed her then, a kiss filled with the same promise he had made years ago to protect, to cherish, to stand against any threat that might come. "Not while I'm alive," he had said. And Hannah knew, with the certainty that comes from a love tested by fire and found unbreakable, that he would keep that promise for all the days of their lives.